Hello Internet, it's your daily dose of disappointment. Sometime last year, I found my mind wandering to a challenge I had laid out for myself during the March of 2020. A year most infamous by the mass populace for bringing the beginning of a tragedy so groundbreaking that every corner of the world would be affected and be forced to adapt to a new way of life for the next year to follow. The new Animal Crossing released. When the pandemic first began, I found myself using Game Grumps' Fire Red playthrough as background noise while trying to fall asleep. As I was laying there listening along, I thought about how fun it would be to play through Fire Red with a friend as well. So the next day I hopped into my Discord and popped on my screen share. When I did this, a bunch of my friends ended up joining and watching along. This led to some of the most positive and cherished memories I created with those friends. So much so, we even created an out-of-context picture of all the jokes that were made during that playthrough. And here it is now. Want answers? Good, because I'm not giving them to you. We enjoyed this experience so much so, I declared that in that moment, I was going to beat every single Pokemon game back to back before the lockdown had ended. I had made it pretty damn far, getting all the way up to Gen 6, whilst hitting some pit stops at some spin-off titles, such as both Ore games and the Pokepark games. I'll throw up my trainer cards as they were documented at the time. I don't have any pictures of my White 2 playthrough, largely in part to the fact they were taken on an old phone that has long since been replaced. I ended up starting my playthrough of Pokemon Ultra Sun Christmas Eve and getting myself pretty damn far. But due to my general disinterest in the game, I tried making it a Nuzlocke for some added engagement, but swiftly had my ass handed to me by this frozen acorn looking at when I ultimately put the game down and slowly the challenge subsided. The challenge itself ultimately became taxing. By the time I had beaten Emerald, all my friends who were along for the ride had gotten bored and moved on to other pastimes, which slowly but surely unmotivated me. It was reminiscing on this memory that led me to think, should I try to take another stab at it? All I'd have to do is beat Ultra Sun and Sword again, which the thought of revisiting those games sent me spiraling down a different thought. See, I of course love the Pokemon franchise, but it was always more the challenge that was what was keeping me going. A sad truth I've been facing as I've come into my adulthood is it can be hard to rationalize sitting down and playing a video game at times, but giving an additional incentive, another purpose to playing rather than the act of relaxation, gave me an excitement I hadn't had in quite some time. Beating a Pokemon game during this marathon gave me such an added rush of fulfillment that it sparked my passion for video games again. So my mind started to wander about any other video game franchise I could possibly take a stab at. Maybe Smash Bros? No, that would get way too repetitive. Persona? I still need to play Persona 1. Maybe later. Kingdom Hearts? Well, that was a bust. After going down this line of thinking for quite some time, I thought to myself, why limit myself to one game franchise? There are so many pivotal games out there I've never gotten the chance to play, either due to lack of access as a child, or the taste I had formulated from those restrictions. What if there were genres or game series out there I had prejudices against without even giving them a fair shot? And with that realization under my belt, I decided I was going to conquer every single major video game franchise. This idea instantly enraptured me, because it meant I could finally see the other side of gaming I had never even considered. But it also could give me that instant gratification of checking something off of a list. Now, before we get into said list, we need to go over some ground rules if we're going to do this right. Let's start off with one of the most controversial aspects of this challenge, and that's what game series qualifies for it. While I of course would love to play every game from every franchise, I'm only one human being with a full-time job, company to manage, and girlfriend to see once every week when I decide to untangle myself from my gamer setup and hobble out of my cave. I come out of there looking like I just exited the fucking wire, dude. But first and foremost, we need to discuss what makes a game qualify for the list. After some conversation with friends and careful consideration, I think a franchise needs to meet either one or more of these requirements. Number 1. The series is widely recognizable either through its characters or its impact on mainstream media. This one is fairly obvious. These would include series that every person with eyes knows, such as Super Mario, Pokemon, or Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry. Number 2, the series either remained relevant in the gaming community or would be widely recognizable by most gamers. These would include games that, well, yes, your grandma might not know, your weird uncle who sits alone at Christmas in the corner on his Steam Deck might. These are franchises that either through their consistent quality or quantity of games have remained relevant in players' hearts for years, or at the very least would be easily recognizable by most. Number 3. The franchise is either a mascot brand for a given company or are considered system sellers. These are games that have become heavily affiliated in players' minds as being icons or companion pieces to a given company. So for Nintendo, it would be games like The Legend of Zelda or Kirby. For modern PlayStation franchises like Uncharted or Tomb Raider. And for Xbox, this could be for Halo or... Number 4. The franchise defined a genre or core aspect of gaming that others would come to follow. These are games that in one way or another broke the mold in a certain aspect, labeling themselves as trendsetters or gaming classics. Like how Metroid and Castlevania created the Metroidvania genre, or how Dark Souls created the Souls-like genre. Number 5. Sheer quality. This might sound redundant, but there are going to be games that are often considered dead franchises in their current state, but their legacy has not been forgotten due to the sheer impact and enjoyment they inspired in their time, such as the Mother series. And finally, 6. They did something unique. This admittedly is going to be a gimme spot. There are some franchises that might not necessarily fit into any of the previously listed qualifiers, but might have done something either equally or greater value that earned themselves in the Hall of Fame. AKA, this is my let me explain their place in gaming history spot. Between these 6 criteria, I think we can start to fill in the board. But first, let's discuss what I mean by completing these games. As much as I would love to grow my beard out, if I tried to go full chard on this one, my parents would be arrested under suspicion of stealing the Lincoln Memorial.
Oh no, he's gonna blast President Lincoln!
So when I say completion, I define this as literally starting the game from the very beginning and playing until the credits roll, or a good old thanks for playing comes up on the screen. Additionally, I only have to complete one game. I don't care if a game is a trilogy, and there will be room to argue I need to play all the games in the franchise to get the full experience. This is a one and done experience. Due to the scope of the undertaking, I had to set some additional parameters like this to make it possible. First of all, I'm defining a franchise by something that has more than 3 major releases in its running. This means franchises like Portal wouldn't make it into the running since they really only have 2 major releases, but the Donkey Kong Country series would since they have well over 3. Second of all, and this is a biggie, no franchises based off of anime, comics, or movies. I know this will probably turn a lot of heads, but if I open the gate up to these forms of media, it would get so cluttered so fast. I already have to discern what video game should qualify for the greatest hit collection, but the second I start including video game adaptations of notable franchises, the conversation gets muddied so quick. Maybe in the future I can do a follow-up to this challenge where I tackle those genres, but in the meantime, I have to narrow my sights down to make this doable. Besides, we're talking about video game history here. The way movies and mainstream media have tried to tackle this genre is a deep dive on its own, and I wouldn't be doing it justice by including it in this list. Though I will give some honorable mentions to Spider-Man for the PS4, Dragon Ball FighterZ, the Arkham Trilogy, and Star Wars Battlefront 2. I don't know much about all of these games from personal experience, barring Spider-Man, which is one of my favorites of all time, but I'm educated enough to know that these games have held major significance both in the casual and competitive scenes and the video game community at large. Thirdly, no sports games. This might be a personal bias showing up, but I honestly don't think sports games should be considered too grand of a part of the video game history conceptually. Don't get me wrong, I know these games have huge audiences and fan bases, and there are portions of active players of these games that really only buy the consoles to play said games. But these are adaptations of real-world activities. Just when I think of pivotal franchises and the biggest video game mascots of the medium, Vince Young isn't exactly in the top 100 of them. If you put a controller in front of me where the objective is I'm playing a sport, if my Mii isn't a playable option, then I'm not playing! Because of this, NBA, NFL, NCIS games, they're all getting canned. Fourthly, only one game from the established franchise needs to be completed to count towards the list. This rule is set in place for the game franchises that over the course of their run have had drastic shifts in gameplay styles. The best example that comes to mind of this would be Sonic. Over the course of his run, get it? Because both the Sonic community and development team have classified Sonic into 2 categories, modern and classic Sonic, with the titles being assigned mainly to what dimension the games are being played in. Are you running from left to right on a flat surface with a pixel art back style? That's classic Sonic, baby! You running in a somewhat open 3D space with the camera positioned behind you? That's modern Sonic. Because of these two wildly varying styles of gameplay, without this rule, would I need to beat one game of each genre? Would Sonic Colors count for both since it has both styles of gameplay? Or would it count for neither? Because of this gray area, we're just going to say one game per franchise counts, no ifs, ands, or buts. I will try not to abuse this ruling by playing wildly different games from the standard quo, but this rule might be utilized later on, who knows? Now, before we get into the list itself, let's go over the games that qualify for the list that I've already completed. Now, to be honest, when I wrote this list, I basically was just jotting down every franchise I could think of that I had played up to this point. So, some of these franchises I wouldn't even put on the list, but I just thought for posterity's sake I might as well. Keeping that in mind, the game series I have already crossed off this list are Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, Kirby, Pokemon, Super Smash Bros., Phoenix Wright, Pikmin, Kid Icarus, Punch-Out!, Fire Emblem, Paper Mario, Animal Crossing, Mario & Luigi, Persona, Kingdom Hearts, Zero Escape, Danganronpa, The Sims, Marvel vs. Capcom, Plants vs. Zombies, and... Wait, that's it? No. Surely, this is my eviction notice. Okay, so I guess it's fair to say I stayed within my lane for the most part of my life. Now, do keep in mind, there are plenty of game franchises I started but just never got around to completing. Such as Call of Duty Black Ops, and... Okay, so it might only be Call of Duty Black Ops. If my memory recollection is correct, then this means I've completed a total of 20 franchises. And realistically, if we take out the ones I wouldn't even consider to be applicable for the list, then I'd only have 12! Now, I suppose, in all fairness to myself, there are a lot of games that didn't get put on that list due to not meeting the 3 games or more requirement. Some of my favorite games of all times are either indie titles or heavily multiplayer-oriented experiences. With all of that out of the way, after racking my brain, setting the stakes, and swallowing the realization that what I'm going to start is going to take well over 1,000 hours to complete, here is the current list. Okay, there's a lot to go over here. For starters, you'll find yourself noticing that some games in the Nintendo selection aren't what you would expect, such as Mega Man and Sonic. Simply put, I didn't want to make separate categories based on publishers, and rather more the main consoles and platforms video games have been getting played on the most. Eat shit, Dreamcast! So for any Namco or Sega game I could think of, I decided to lump them in with the Nintendo list, based on the amount of their games that have been put on the consoles over the years. Plus, I had already completed a lot of major Nintendo games. So this helps balance out the list a little bit. Prime example of this being the Yakuza series. Then after that, you might find your eyes working over to the arcade section below Nintendo showing. The arcade section is a very specific category, and honestly one I might want your opinion on. These are iconic games that might not have the most conventional forms of completion or endings. Take the fighting games like Street Fighter or Tekken for example. While one could argue that all you have to do to beat those games would be take one character through the campaign mode, some would argue that you would need to play through the campaign with all characters. But to that point, that also could be considered needless completion. If we compare that line of thinking to something like Mario Galaxy, that means I would have to get all 120 stars to truly experience everything the game has to see? I want to include these games for their place in gaming history, especially the competitive scenes, so I ended up coming up with a compromise. Currently, for games in the arcade category, each game here might have a different form of completion. Whether it's get through a certain amount of campaigns, completing a certain niche task, or at the bare minimum, playing over 5 hours of the game. Why 5 hours? Well, I feel like that's a fair amount of time for a player to sink into a game to get through all of its tutorials, find their footing, and truly start experiencing what the games might have to offer. Unless you're Pokemon Sun and Moon, in which case you can fuck right off then! I purposely didn't start any games in this category for this video because I really wanted feedback on how I should handle games of these effects. And if any fighting game fans had suggestions for their terms of completion, I will be reading the comments on this video, so please let me know what you think. Now, while I think my PlayStation list is incredibly reasonable and fairly ironed out, I'm sure my Xbox list is going to turn some heads. Only 3 games? And one of them is Call of Duty? Okay, realistically, Call of Duty should be in the PC category, but come on, let's give them the Xbox a bone here. They're doing the best they can. In all seriousness, after pitching this concept to some friends, this was all we could really muster for as far as Xbox original franchises. I originally had Gears of War and Forza on the list to try to iron it out in their favor, but I'm sorry, I just don't really think they belong. For one, Forza could debatably be considered a sport, NASCAR and all, and while Gears of War could be considered as a system mascot, it just ultimately doesn't seem like it does anything too much differently than other monumental shooters on the list already. So for now, we're gonna keep the list as it is. As a neat little bonus to this, I'm also going to be ranking these games from a best to worst as we go along. I think it could be a unique little fun way to keep track of this sort of thing. And with that, I think that basically covers everything. If you think there are games that should be on this list that aren't already, please let me know. I'd love the feedback, and I want to be able to say I completed this challenge to the best of my ability. So, I started this challenge nearly in the middle of 2022, right? Surely I must have cleaved a good amount off that list. Maybe 8 or 9 games? 5? Okay, I know this is a piddling amount with the time I've had, but I've been busy. I wrote and published a book, okay? Has good old Scott the Woz done that? No, but in all seriousness, please consider checking out The Dread of Night. It's the only way I'm going to be able to afford playing Five Nights at Freddy's. I have to get my fix, please. So, obviously, I'm not going to be able to cover the whole challenge in one video. This is going to require multiple videos to cover, but my goal is to honestly try to complete at least half of this list by the end of the year. So to keep up with my progress on that, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell for more notifications on this series. But I guess in the meantime, I might as well tell you what games I decided to tackle first, huh? New year, another new type of video format. I gotta make up my mind, man. The game that gets the honor of being first will be the Donkey Kong Country series, or Donkey Kong Country 3 to be specific. When going over this idea, my friend TJ was eager to see someone else play one of his favorite games, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Now it goes without saying that over the course of this series, you're going to get a very good understanding of my tastes and preferred genres. But when it comes to platformers, it's very hit or miss. As a kid, I used to love them. That is, when they were the majority of my options I had at my disposal. As I grew up and I gained more options to games, such as when I got a PS4 and my PC, I very quickly learned I don't think I like 2D platformers. It was a surprise to me for sure, and don't misunderstand, I don't think there's anything wrong with these games. They just don't seem to scratch that itch in my brain that they used to. Due to this realization, I was actually going into this game very unoptimistic. But when I actually decided to play it, I really enjoyed it. No, seriously, guys, this game rules. Donkey Kong Country forgoes the Donkey and Diddy we've grown accustomed to in the past games, and instead opts to replace them with... In this game, you play as Dixie Kong and making his first and final appearance, Kiddy Kong. One day, the two apes we've become familiar with have been kidnapped by a crowned lime, and it's up to batshit and crazy to break the crates, nab the nanners, and save the girl, boy, monkey. In DKC 3, you play through the linear platforming stages, doing your best to get from start to finish of each level while collecting bananas, letters for extra lives, and finishing every level by hoisting your active Kong's flag. You travel through multiple open-ended worlds the game has to offer. You defeat a handful of bosses and the credits roll, right? Nothing too crazy? Not even slightly. For starters, one of the game's major differences to expect when going into DKC is that while yes, these games feature America's favorite family, these games weren't primarily developed by Nintendo, but instead were developed by Rare. These guys built a legacy around themselves in the next two generations of gaming at the time, constantly putting out S-tier games, Banjo-Kazooie, GoldenEye, Conker's Bad Fur Day. You've heard it all before, and it's for good reason. This success eventually led them towards even grander heights, and making their best decision yet, by selling themselves to Microsoft. No, I can't do it, sorry. As a kid who grew up playing just about every Mario platformer there was, the shift in quality and innovation between these two franchises for the time is uncanny. For starters, as you leap from log to log like a monkey with clogs, you'll soon notice you're actually in control of both Kongs at the same time. You have Dixie, who is smaller, much more nimble, and allowing you to use her hair to twirl and glide, covering large amounts of land, skipping massive portions of levels if done correctly. Then, there is Kiddy Kong, who functions very similarly to Donkey Kong, having a quick roll and skip along water. You truly never are safe from the tyranny of water. The game also features the toss mechanic, where the Kongs are able to pick up and throw one another. If you're playing as Kiddy, you can pick up Dixie and throw her large distances, allowing you to access high-up ledges and nab any collectibles that might be hidden just outside your reach. And if you're playing as Dixie, you're able to throw Kiddy. Much shorter distances, sure, but due to his weight, he's able to break holes in the ground, allowing you to access hidden collectibles and secret pathways. You take all of these mechanics, combine it with the smooth as butter physics, such as your jump arc being just right, a satisfying amount of speed, a large open map to explore for additional collectibles, animal sections, and levels to break up the standard gameplay experience. items and power-ups to purchase, one of the SNES's finest soundtracks, and some of the most genius level design you've ever seen in a platformer, and you've got yourselves one of the best platformers the SNES has to offer. And when I say genius level design, I truly do mean it. If I had to pick one character from the game that best describes the game as a whole, I would have to pick Ellie. Because unlike Kitty, she's an elephant, and elephants never forget! If you try to complete this game from start to finish, you will soon come to realize that Rareware left no stone unturned when designing these levels. If you get introduced to a new mechanic or level gimmick, you should fully expect for it to show up in a later level with a new twist or element to vary it from its predecessor. Take, for example, the animal stages. Think playing as Ellie or on guard were fun? How about full-on boss battles created around them? How about those barrels you've been able to toss around the entire series? What if we took that new angled throwing mechanics from this game and have you use it to hurl the barrels up for a boss fight? Or even Cranky Sideshow, an optional minigame featured in each world. They couldn't possibly bring this into the main journey. Just kidding! Better get good, kid, cause Frosty's pissed and he's packing heat! The absolute catalyst of this, however, is in the second to last level of the game, Poisonous Pipeline. Playing this level was the exact moment that made me realize there was absolutely 0% chance that the developers of this game love their children and would like to remain married to their wives because this level is outright cynical. See, Donkey Kong Country has always had a good reputation with their water levels, being accompanied by relaxing music and fair but challenging level design. But Poisonous Pipeline aims to be the most challenging water level in the game. I'll even argue to say the franchise. For starters, take the tight and cramped sewer level structure from earlier and dial it to 11 with way more urchins and fish enemies. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Well, notice how the water there is a little pink? The water is poisoned. What do you think the poison does? Well, I mean, naturally, it inverts your controller settings! The developers of this bastard level made children all over the world stilt their brain function. Oh my fucking god! Just so they could play through this dense as hell tricky water level with their controller essentially flipped upside down. To make matters worse, there are also segments of this level where you have to jump out of the water where your controls aren't even inverted. This level of trolling isn't what I'd expect to see in a Nintendo game. This is the kind of shit indie games are doing nowadays to troll their players. Yeah, you know what? That has to be it. The devils down at Rare Scare are trying to fuck with us. I mean, look at the game over screen for God's sakes. They are calling us fucking toddlers. As you can probably tell, when this game wants to, it can get excruciatingly hard. Like with level 27, Confused Cliffs, where you're constantly having to swap between ropes and avoid flying hazards. Or in level 33, Lightning Lookout, where lightning is randomly striking all over the place, zapping bodies of water or any metal barrels. While levels like these can be hard, no doubt about it, the controls and mechanics of these stages are so tight. Levels never feel unfair. Almost! For the majority of the game, when you make a mistake, you don't feel cheated. You feel like you need to get better. Which means when you defeat a hard level, you're not sitting there pissed off and feeling like your time was wasted. You feel truly accomplished. Unless you're Poisonous Pipeline, in which case you can bugger right back off. Honestly, there isn't too much else more to say. As much as it challenged me, DKC3 is a remarkable platformer that feels great to control, has amazing level design, and fully utilizes every single tool at its disposal to make an amazing platform that still holds up to this day. There's a reason these games are still getting made, even after developers have swapped hands. If they're even as half as clever or fun or unique as the third game, then they might be alright in my book too. Kiddy Kong and the gang are going at the top of the list, but how long can they hold the throne? After I beat Donkey Kong Country 3, my spirits were pretty high about the challenge. It had only taken me less than 24 hours to beat the game, so I decided I had had my fill of platformers for the time being, and booted up Sonic Mania. As much as I've kept up with Sylvester the Sinkhole over here, I've never actually completed one of his games for myself. I got Sonic Unleashed for the Nintendo Wii right around when I was 7, right before our Christmas break, and I remember adoring it, although the sands of time have probably muddied that opinion. I haven't played the game in well over 10 years, and I'm not sure how much I would enjoy the... Then a few years later, I got a copy of Sonic Colors for the Wii. I remember it being quite alright, but I didn't really get too far into it. It was a bit of a similar experience with both Sonic Adventures that I had accrued on Steam. For what it's worth, I've been an avid fan of Sonic through YouTubers for years now. The aforementioned Game Grumps, Radical Soda, and Ellis Mark, just to name a few. But I'm also well aware that the Sonic community can be a bit... divisive on what's the best game in the franchise. Everyone has their favorites, and that's totally okay. But going into this list, I tried to think about the game that would upset the least amount of people. So, I ended up landing on the shining gem and beat Sonic Mania. With such a critically acclaimed game at my hands, what did I think of it? I think that you'll all be very pleased to hear that I think the game is... okay. I honestly am not too sure what I thought, even now that I've had a few months to sink it in. Well, let's at least start with the introductions by stating that Sonic Mania is not only a love letter to the classic trilogy of Sonic games, but also a project powered by passion and love for the franchise. The development team of Sonic Mania was stacked with major members of the Sonic community. Spearheading the operation was none other than Christian Whitehead, who had garnered some notoriety for his work on the Sonic the Hedgehog mobile ports. Alongside him, we had YouTube's own T-Lopes composing the entire soundtrack. This was a game made by fans for fans, and they make sure you damn well know it. There is so much fan service packed into this game, such as bringing back classic characters such as, Jet the Hawk, Polar Express, and Jerry? The plot of the game is fairly simple. Eggman and his new band of deviled eggs have found and harnessed the power of the Phantom Ruby, and are going to use it to try to take over the world. So it's up to Sonic and his friends to traverse through lands old and new, bust down the badniks and stop Eggman before it's too late, running, platforming, and nabbing the emeralds along your way. So that's all fine and good, but we should address the elephant in the room. I did not grow up as a die-hard Sonic fan. Sure, I played a few of the games and even kept up with Sonic X, but I wasn't as much of a fan as some other people on the internet might be. So while this game can be enjoyed by any consumer, I do feel like I'm a little out of the main demographic. Now don't get me wrong, I love this little bastard. I've been watching passionate Sonic fans make videos about him for years.
Absolute worst experience.
Sonic Colors!
Can I just say the first hour or so of this game is terribly weak?
And I'd like to say I'm a member of the community to an extent. I'm just very much on the outer ring of it. Now don't get me wrong, I still think Sonic Mania is a fine game, no doubt about it. The pixel art, level aesthetics, and music are all just phenomenal. Sonic feels pretty good at control, and the special stages are an excellent change of pace from the usual running and jumping. And the polygonal designs in these stages are so charming. But, I'm sorry folks, I just don't think 2D Sonic games are all for me. Now keep in mind, this is not a comment on the quality of Sonic Mania. I'm intelligent enough to acknowledge that this is the best Sonic game we've had in years.
No.
But I just don't know, you guys, it wasn't clicking for me. There were definitely parts of the game I loved, such as the few opening stages, the occasional high-speed moments the levels would let you reach. And hell, I'd give anything to have Mean Bean Machine selectable from the main menu. But the standard practice of getting from point A to point B in Sonic Mania just wasn't clicking with me. Lots of little things were beginning to pile up. And I could honestly go into a lot more detail, but the main critiques I have are pretty common on the internet when it comes to 2D Sonic. Trying to build up speed only to be punished by a threat I couldn't possibly have seen coming. Lengths of stages were incredibly long, which meant if I got a game over, I had to return to the beginning of the whole zone, which could mean losing 20 minutes of progress. Then there were some Mania-specific problems, such as the Sandworm boss and the plane controls. Some of the level design was getting annoying, specifically the parts where you had to wait, and a lot of the underwater segments as well. Now, I'm gonna be completely honest and say a lot of this is probably just a skill issue, and it's not at the fault of the game's design, but it's just not the design I like in my platformers. The game is punishing, and to be fair, sometimes it's not even at my fault. For as many deaths were at my own cause, there's shit like this that happens. That just doesn't seem fair. Now I'm gonna say a sentence that I don't think anyone else on the internet has. Let's compare Sonic Mania to Donkey Kong Country 3.
What?
Okay.
While I'll give Sonic Mania full credit to being one of the best 2D platformers we've gotten in the past few years, after playing Donkey Kong Country 3, it was a lot harder for me to get the same enjoyment out of Mania. For starters, in an average playthrough of Sonic Mania, your main objective is getting from point A to point B, and if you get enough rings, try to nag some of the extra special stages. These can attain you the Chaos Emeralds if you succeed in them, and if you get enough of them, you can unlock Super Sonic and an extra boss at the end of the game. Which, I'm glad that it's there, but those are really the only things you're working towards in Sonic Mania. From the moment you start up your save file, you are being railroaded down a select course of levels. While these levels are enjoyable, sure, the only thing you're doing is trying to get the emeralds and get to the end of the stage. There's not really much else to work towards while you're going through the game. But comparing that to DKC, not only did you have bananas you were going towards, similar to collecting rings to get extra lives, there also were the 4 Kong letters in each stage that could get you an extra life, and the DK coins. And not only could the DK coins be found in the levels, but they could also be found across the giant open world map you had to traverse, where you could explore for secret little nooks and crannies to play little mini games to get more rewards. And inside that open world, there were also shops that you could use your rings, bananas, to try to buy more power-ups and upgrades. And even a map-wide side quest to unlock you an extra world with extra levels. And if we go back to the standard gameplay loop, DKC had a lot of different ways to break up the average running and jumping. But comparing that to Sonic Mania, the only thing you're ever doing is running and jumping, and at most, you have up to 1 of 5 characters to play as, sure, but without mods, you have to start entire save files over to try to swap those characters. I'll give it credit, these characters play wildly differently and change how you traverse these levels depending on who you're playing as. But there still is a lack of variety in how you tackle levels in themselves. The only time I can think of that the major Sonic Mania gameplay loop changes throughout the journey is when you're playing Mean Bean Machine. Now look, I'm not saying Sonic needs to have wildly different playstyles throughout the entire journey to make it fair. None of these comparisons I'm making are necessarily critiques on how Sonic Mania is played, but more just a better understanding of why I think I like DKC more than Sonic Mania. Because there's more to do in it, and what there was to do in Sonic Mania, I just personally wasn't enjoying that much. But this could 100% stem from my disposition towards 2D platformers. And honestly, if I hadn't planned this marathon months prior to Sonic Frontier's release, I probably would have given that game a better shot.
Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
It seems to be a little bit more up my alley. As many ups and downs Sonic Mania brought, I was able to knock it out in only a handful of sittings, only taking around 15 hours to complete it all the way through. Yeah, I'm not too good at this game, am I? Despite my criticisms, I have to be able to acknowledge its quality. I'm going to be putting it at the top of C tier, despite not enjoying the experience too much, but I know that the game is really well crafted. But I'm trying to rank these off of my personal experience with them, if that makes any sense. If we were ranking this just on sheer quality, it would probably be closer to B, but just for consistency's sake, it's gonna stay down there at C. Deciding to seriously take a step back from platformers, I decided to take a look at some of Sega's other offerings. This led me to realize that I had never actually finished my playthrough of Yakuza Like a Dragon, and I had to immediately fix that because no lie everyone, I will be shocked if anything manages to surpass this game on the list. The game was on my radar as early as 2021. I remember joining a VC where a friend of mine was streaming it. I watched him play through the first few hours of the game and instantly knew I had to get my hands on it for myself. And when I did, it's safe to say I got my money's worth. Although I'll be first to admit, I'm a bit of a fake fan of the franchise. I've only ever played Like a Dragon, never really touching any of the other games. I started to play through a bit of Judgment, but I haven't gotten that far yet. I just wasn't too enticed by the gameplay mechanics they had at display. And honestly, for the longest time, none of my peers or even the YouTubers I watched had ever really covered the topic. So that begs the question, why is this game franchise on the list? Well, it turns out this franchise has a massive fandom and community backing it that I just was never aware of. The Yakuza franchise is also one of the only other notable Sega franchises that are still relevant in the modern age. And it's also crazy huge in Japan. Whether we like it or not, folks, Goro Majima is here in the same league as Big the Cat. I don't make the rules, I only enforce them. It turns out that Yakuza Like a Dragon is actually the 8th game in the Yakuza timeline. So what led to me jumping into the game so late? Well, the gameplay is wildly different from the rest of the franchise. The mainline Yakuza games are mainly fast beat-em-up type games, whereas Like a Dragon is a turn-based RPG with quick-time events to execute your attacks. Yes, everyone, we have combined the underground political hierarchy of Japanese gangs and politics with Mario and Luigi? The game follows our protagonist Ichiban Kasuga, who starts off as a low-ranking member of the Arakawa clan after he was taken in during his youth. After he got involved and beat up a low-ranking member of another clan, he claimed to be part of the Arakawa family. This eventually led to the patriarch of that family coming in and saving the kid, earning Ichiban's respect for life. You play through the first hour or two of the game getting used to the combat, and you learn this by doing usual Yakuza activities like shaking people down for overdue loans. After a while of this, however, Daddy Dearest calls in Kasuga. He tells him that another member of their clan had killed another Yakuza family member unprovoked, which is against the code of conduct. Arakawa asks Kasuga to shoulder the responsibility and go to jail in his place, which he ends up agreeing to, just wanting to make his mentor proud. We cut to 18 years later when Kasuga is released from prison, eager to meet up with the rest of the clan after being away for so long. A few tussles and some new brim later, Kasuga comes to find things are wildly different than when they were before his incarceration. Not only does he have to adjust to modern life, but he's also not able to get a hold of Arakawa no matter what he does. In your pursuit of knowledge, you end up teaming up with a cop named Adachi, already a bad sign, and Ninja Turtle your way through the sewers until you end up breaking into a clan meeting where you find Arakawa, who welcomes you home with a bullet to the chest?
You have to die.
Huh? Yeah, so right out the gate, this game hits you with some huge ass questions. What happened to the clan? Why did Arakawa shoot you? And who the hell is this guy? The game instantly hooks you with this enticing narrative that consistently keeps you engaged as you navigate through the city, trying to uncover the answers to these questions, while using the world building already established like building blocks, as they continue to build off of them with even more characters and topics that you wouldn't expect to find from a regular JRPG. For example, after getting clipped in the back of the head in the meeting, you end up waking up in a homeless encampment in the middle of the city, getting patched up by this guy named Yu Nanba. Wait, you and Adachi? Should I be expecting any other Persona characters to come running to join my party?
Do-re-mi, fuck you!
What the hell is going on here?
He ends up telling Ichiban how they found him in a body bag just thrown outside the shelter, so he patched him up. This leads to Ichiban resting in camp for the next few days and getting to experience firsthand not only the struggles the homeless people have to deal with, such as lower member clans coming to shake them down for any little money they've already had to scavenge for, but most people living there are content with their lives. And while the rest of the city might look down on them, they're their own little community that work together and help each other out. Furthermore, shortly after that chapter, you end up stumbling upon a woman named Hamako, who is being harassed by this group called Bleach Japan, an organization whose goal is to cleanse the city of the gray spots between the black and white. They end up harassing Hamako for housing illegal sex workers in her building under the veil of just owning a normal restaurant. After you scare them off with the use of some sex rag, you end up talking with Hamako a bit more, as not only does she give you and your friends a room to stay in, finally getting off of the streets, but you also get to learn more about the girls who work there. And not only are most of them only working there until they can afford to get their visas, but most of them really take pride in their work and aren't ashamed of it. The game isn't afraid to take stabs at dicey subject matters like these, and they also manage to handle them in an extremely respectful way. They continue to build more into topics like these later in the game too. Succession and the stress that comes with it. Undevoted admiration and loyalty, but losing a bit of yourself along the way. Topics like these I've never really seen covered in a video game before. I don't want to get too much into the game's story, as I truly do believe it's one best experienced for yourself. But the game, while remaining engaging, can have you laughing at one moment.
Can you deal with these tissues? You do it. It's your job.
And then emotional the next.
When I was a kid, all I wanted to be was a hero.
On top of the amazing story, the gameplay remains consistently engaging too. As previously mentioned, the game is now played as a JRPG, which they explain in the most comedic way. It's established really early on that Ichiban is a huge fucking nerd who was obsessed over Dragon Quest his entire childhood. And because of this, he now sees the world as an RPG. so you're playing the game from his point of view. The gameplay is pretty standard RPG fare. You have a large cast of characters that you can customize with armor, weapons, and trinkets as you take them into turn-based QTE-centered fights. But one of the main things that sets this game apart is how the fights are characterized. Like a dragon finds a way to turn every mundane job or social standing the party has into a fully fleshed out JRPG class. Ichiban is your standard bruiser who is quite literally labeled the hero class. But instead of a sword, he literally rips a baseball bat out of a mound of concrete. Meanwhile, Nanba, your homeless friend, serves as your party's mage, dealing elemental attacks by spitting alcohol into a lighter to breathe fire and throw bird seeds at people so the pigeons flock and attack them. Not a bird fan? That's fine, don't worry. Because if you're not a fan of a character's given class, you can always go to a job agency and swap your profession on the fly. Some of these classes include bodyguard, chef, fortune teller, or breakdancer? You're telling me I can destroy an entire Yakuza patriarchy by doing some head spins and backflips? This game fucking rules! The best part about all of this is the game incentivizes you to mix and match these throughout the game. Each class has 2 or more moves that if you get them to high enough levels with, you can keep them permanently no matter what class you change to. So if you play your cards right, all your characters can have a massive move spread by the end of the game. Oh, and dude, don't even get me started on the minigames! Being a Yakuza game, there are plenty of side quests and minigames you can complete. One minute you could be trying to watch a movie while avoiding harassment from these weird goat-headed freaks, and the next you're beating the shit out of this dude with a baity just to unlock him as a summon after you do. The absolute highlight of this optional content for me though is the business minigame. You end up finding this girl who informs you her family confection business is going under and she needs help salvaging it. You end up agreeing and help run the company. This one side quest leads you into an entirely different game. You are now managing employees, sending them to different locations and jobs, and having shareholder boss battles. And the stakes have never been higher. Listen to the music that plays as you launch your chicken at the nearest shareholder. And the game fucking wants you to play this minigame more than any of the others, because the rewards are so much grander. Not only do you get an additional optional party member to add to your team, but you also can call an orbital laser down on whatever person you want! Anyways, the party members in this game are some of the best in an RPG I've ever played, even being up there with the ranks of Persona 4 and 5, which makes sense since they were both partially made by Sega. The variety of characters you meet in the game is insane. Not only do you have previously mentioned Nanba and Adachi, who are a nurse turned homeless and a detective discharged and turned into car instructor, but you end up getting a handful of other friends, equally as diverse as the first two. Everyone you recruit in one way or another comes from a different walk of life, but all still manage to mesh well together. The game does an excellent job of building these characters not only through the story, but through side conversations that can be found while sitting down and ordering food, or while walking around town and making jovial conversation. Which, yes, I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that the #1 top viewed video on this channel is a video going over exactly that. I'm not angry, you are! The main thing the game did right about these characters though was the way they handled their barside chats. At some point in the game, you end up becoming friends with a barkeeper that provides you with more permanent lodgings. Throughout the game, you'll be able to build your relationship meter with your allies by taking them to dinner, using them in battle, and even having some of those side conversations. It's a very similar way that Persona handles its confidant mechanic. Once a given character's meter is full, you can sit down and have a talk with them more about their personal life. Again, I don't want to spoil too much about the game's story, and these are some of the major parts I really want people to experience, but let's take Adachi's for example. Through his barside chats, Adachi eventually opens up to Kasuga, telling him about how the way that he lost his license was that he had falsely accused a man and gotten him arrested. He found out that the people interrogated him using intimidation, and forced him to omit his alibi from his testimony, getting him falsely incarcerated. When Adachi tried to bring this up with the DMV, they eventually let him go, afraid that if he pressed the matter further then it would bring about some stir in the agency. Regardless of this, he ends up learning that the guy had a son, and he's continued to send him money to support him through college under an alias. But the excessive amount of money he's been sending him has been leaving him quite poor. These little conversations just add so many more layers to these characters, and they only get more interesting and engaging the more characters you get to talk to. I honestly love this game way too much to do it justice in a short review here, so don't be surprised if in the future there's gonna be a standalone video going over Like a Dragon. But needless to say, I fucking adored it. I honestly spent so long playing this game, it's part of what made this video come out so much later. As for now, Like a Dragon is going in S tier. I sincerely doubt anything from this list will make it past it, but I really hope something will. And for now, I believe that this video has run on long enough. We got a good amount of work done today though, so we should probably check out the chart, huh? Oh, and Adam, make sure you give it some fitting fanfare as well. Huh, funny, I thought it would be more apparent than that. Well, I think it's safe to say I have my work cut out for me. I know this video was a little bit cluttered and bounced around from genre to genre, but going forward, I'd like to handle this list in a more concise manner, and break them up into groups such as fighting games or even horror games, rather than just throwing a smorgasbord at you like this. But even still, I hope it remained enjoyable. Fans of the channel probably already know this, but I've jumped around a lot in the types of content I've been creating this year. I've been trying to figure out what style sat best with me, and which I enjoyed making the most. And I really think this scripted and heavily edited format is the kind I want to keep making. This video was a lot more fun to make for both Adam and I, who were both eager to see what everyone thinks of it. So if for any reason you enjoyed me rambling for almost an hour now, and want to see what I think of the rest of the games, consider subscribing and hitting that funny little bell down there. I'll do my best not to disappoint. And hey, why not comment below what games you want me to play through next, and if there are any on the games that are missing from the list. That's gonna be it from me for now, but thank you all again, and I'll see you Jomies next time. Hey, thank you guys for getting through that hell of a video. That was the longest thing I've ever uploaded to the channel, barely beating out Snow Day by about maybe 20 minutes or so, the runtime I'm recording this. I'm not really scripting it, so this is going to be a little off the cusp. Might not be the best delivered, or might just be a long string of empty thoughts as it's slowly getting back on track. Just wanted to thank everyone for getting this far. This is the kind of content I really do want to gear my channel in the way of. I really like this challenge, I've had a lot of fun doing it, and even if the video style stays the same but might be covering different topics, I've got quite a few ideas I want to do, but ultimately this style of editing and scripting, this feels the most right to me. It was something I played around with in that Mario Kart video, go check that out, it'll probably be up in one of the cards. But it feels right. Me and Adam, if you haven't caught on, Adam is my editor. We really feel like we're getting into a groove with this one, and we want to try to get out a video at least, I don't know, maybe once a month. We got a lot of ambitious project in mind, so no promises, but hey, maybe we can get more than one out a month, or maybe one every other month, who knows. But thank you to everyone who we kind of snagged some of the footage for this video for. This is my first time doing a video like this, so I didn't really have the time nor equipment to record footage for every single video game showcased, so we took some creative liberties, but everyone's credits are going on screen right now. They're right there. I hope they're still there. I've been talking for a while. I'll cut it here, but thank you guys again, and please subscribe if you want to see more of this challenge or any other videos like it, and thanks. Buy my book.